Dennis lived in New York City, a place that never seemed to sleep. The city was always alive, bustling with energy and noise. It was big and noisy, filled with the constant hum of activity. Dennis, on the other hand, was quiet and introspective. He liked to watch people, finding solace in observing the world around him. It was his way of connecting with the city without getting lost in its chaos. He watched them rush to work, walk their dogs, and chase taxis. Each person had their own story, their own rhythm, and Dennis found it fascinating. Dennis often felt small in the city, like a leaf in a hurricane swept along by the currents of life around him. Every day, Dennis took the same route to his job at the library. The routine was comforting, a small island of predictability in a sea of unpredictability. He liked the quiet order of the library. It was a sanctuary where he could escape the noise and find peace. Books were his friends, filled with stories of adventure and bravery. They transported him to different worlds, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. Dennis longed for those adventures, but his own life felt very ordinary. He often found himself daydreaming, imagining what it would be like to be part of those stories. He dreamed of being a hero, like the ones in his books. In his mind, he was brave and daring, ready to face any challenge. He imagined rescuing people from burning buildings and stopping runaway trains. These fantasies gave him a sense of purpose, even if only for a moment. But Dennis knew, deep down, that those were just fantasies. His reality was much quieter, much simpler. He was just Dennis, the quiet librarian. And while his life might not be filled with grand adventures, it was his own, and he found contentment in the small moments of joy and peace. Dennis loved comic books. He collected them all, from the Golden Age classics to the latest issues. His room was a treasure trove of colorful covers and epic tales. Superman, Spider-Man, Wonder Woman, they were his heroes. Their stories of courage and justice filled his imagination. They were strong and brave, always ready to face any challenge. They inspired Dennis to dream big. Dennis wished he could be like them, to have the power to make a difference. He often found himself lost in daydreams, imagining what it would be like to have superhuman abilities. But he was just Dennis, the quiet guy who worked at the library. His days were filled with the soft rustle of pages and the scent of old books. He'd watch the news, hoping to see everyday heroes. Stories of bravery and selflessness fascinated him. Firefighters saving people from fires, doctors helping sick children. These were the real-life heroes he admired. Even the crossing guard, helping kids cross the street, seemed braver than Dennis. Their simple acts of kindness and courage made a big impact. He felt like he was always on the sidelines, watching life happen. It was as if he was a spectator in his own story. Sometimes, Dennis would imagine himself in heroic situations. He'd dream of rescuing people, of being the one everyone looked up to. He'd picture himself saving the day, performing incredible feats of strength and bravery. In his mind, he was unstoppable, but then reality would set in. He wasn't strong. He wasn't fast. He was just Dennis, the quiet guy who liked to read about heroes. Yet in those quiet moments, surrounded by his beloved comic books, Dennis found a different kind of strength. The stories he cherished gave him hope and inspiration. They reminded him that heroism isn't just about superpowers, it's about courage, kindness, and the willingness to help others, no matter how small the act. One afternoon, Dennis was walking through Times Square. The air was thick with the hum of conversations, the honking of taxis, and the distant wail of sirens. It was a typical day in the heart of the city, where the energy was palpable and the crowd seemed endless. It was crowded and chaotic. People from all walks of life moved in every direction, creating a sea of faces and bodies. Tourists snapped photos, street performers entertained, and vendors called out to passers-by. Lights flashed, music blared, and people bumped into each other. Dennis felt overwhelmed. The sensory overload was almost too much to bear, and he longed for a moment of peace amidst the chaos. He just wanted to get to the quiet of the library. The thought of the serene, hushed environment was a beacon of hope in the midst of the bustling city. Suddenly, he heard a small voice. It was faint, almost drowned out by the noise around him, but it was there.
Mommy? The voice was filled with a mix of fear and hope, a tiny plea in the vastness of the crowd.
A little girl, no older than 5, stood alone, tears streaming down her face. Her small frame seemed even smaller against the backdrop of the towering buildings and the throngs of people. She clutched a stuffed bear, her eyes wide with fear. The bear, Once a source of comfort, now seemed like her only friend in the world. People rushed past, oblivious to her plight. They were too absorbed in their own lives to notice the small child in distress. Dennis's heart ached for her. He could feel her fear and confusion as if it were his own. He knew he should help. The thought of leaving her alone was unbearable. He had to do something. He couldn't just walk away and pretend he hadn't seen her, but his feet felt glued to the ground. The enormity of the situation paralyzed him. What if he made things worse? The fear of doing the wrong thing gnawed at him. What if he couldn't find her mother? The thought of failing her was terrifying. Fear threatened to overwhelm him. The weight of responsibility was heavy on his shoulders, but the little girl's scared face spurred him on. He couldn't let his fear stop him from doing what was right. He had to be brave. For her sake, he had to find the courage to act. With a deep breath, Dennis stepped forward, ready to help the lost child in the crowd.